Ryan, you're not just a sports media critic, you're also a newsbreaker. Shall we start with that?
Let's do it. So I broke the news on, I believe it's Thursday morning, that Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee had a combustible private phone conversation. It stemmed from a project that hasn't been announced yet that Stephen A.'s production company is making for ESPN, and it rose to the point where McAfee called Stephen A. Motherfucker.
No.
And
not so the motherfucker.
After I reached out, I don't think that they had resolved it before I reached out, but certainly after I did, they got kind of thrown together and came out with statements saying they had great love for each other now, and that no one ever denied that they had this discussion. What was denied was I had heard that in the aftermath of the argument that Stephen A. had banned Pat McAfee from First Take, and both of them denied that to have been the case. And so that's where we are. What were your thoughts when you saw this?
My thoughts are generally, it's two things. The first is that Stephen A. Smith, I believe, finds himself in a bit of a predicament where he has attempted to do something late. He has gotten in too late on the thing he wants, and it's causing consternation behind the scenes. It's number one. The second one actually relates to Shannon Sharpe, and I believe we underestimated his ability to be this superstar who runs his own YouTube channel and has these explosive interviews. We wondered when he broke up with Skip Bayless if he could still keep going, but maybe I was just ignorant to it. I didn't understand how big his podcast was already. It might have been one of these things where it's just way bigger in what we will loosely call the black community than I could have ever conceived of. And really, it's just popular altogether and has only gained steam since he left Skip Bayless and joined ESPN. So Stephen A. is looking at Shannon Sharpe. This is what I hear. This is what I hear people saying. He's looking at Shannon Sharpe, and Shannon Sharpe isn't just a oh God, am I going to try to pronounce this word in my daylight saving times, daylight savings time state, well-remunerated host on ESPN. He has his own thing. It's the difference between renting and owning, and it's a big thing, and Stephen A. wants it. And he looks at Pat McAfee, and Pat McAfee has his own thing, and he can boss ESPN around, even if his ratings aren't so great. I feel as though that's my interpretation. Stephen A. not having his own thing, not getting to YouTube early enough because he's been the company man, is causing a lot of regret and causing a lot of argumentation behind the scenes.
I don't think it's that. I think it was,
How dare you? Hey, ever hear of improv? Yes, and you're gonna disagree with me on my own podcast. Fine,
I am.
Fine,
well, good. The show that creates the argument. That's not us, actually. That's Around the Horn. But,
okay.
I think that this was not a battle in the macro. It was a battle in the micro. There was something that McAfee did on whatever this project is that Stephen A. is running. Stephen A. didn't like it, and tempers flared. And these are two people who are very proud and don't back down from fights. And it caused a combustible argument that escalated to the point where I heard about it. Regarding Shannon, so yeah, his podcast was a monster. I didn't expect him to be this enormous out on his own, and it's a multifaceted equation. He is on First Take a couple days a week, and he partnered with Colin Cowherd's Volume, and the people on there who behind the scenes, I don't know exactly who's running the social, but I know Logan Swaim is the head of content for the Volume. And this team of people, Ethan, is very talented at distribution digitally. We see that with Draymond Green's podcast and the way that it gets clipped up and millions of views happen, whether they're via YouTube or X or TikTok or whatever. And I think Shannon Sharpe has only risen their level. And for whatever reason, this is like a group of people who know exactly how to cut stuff up and title it on YouTube to maximize the viewership to it. And
I just love that you're taking top tier Brock Purdy hater Shannon Sharpe, and you're giving him the allegation that he gives Brock Purdy. What, Shannon Sharpe is he's a system broadcaster is what you're saying. It's the surrounding talent.
Broadcaster. They could not take me and you and get us millions of views, I don't think. You need a big star already, and they were fortunate to acquire his ready-made YouTube feed. And so it's not like they were starting from zero. Fox Sports built up a lot of that with their team, and then they gifted it to him in a similar way that ESPN gave Dan Le Batard his podcast feeds when he left ESPN. You know, Bill Simmons, when he left, he had the #1 sports podcast. ESPN did not give him his feed, and he had to rebuild at the Ringer from scratch. Le Batard and Shannon got head starts in this regard, and it was like enormously helpful for them in their immediate ability to draw a lot of revenue. But you know, we're getting away from the Stephen A stuff, but
and by the way, we're getting away from a lot of things, because I do think that if you interviewed Cat Williams for more than an hour, I believe they could get 1 million views on that. I just know I would watch that. But continue. What were you saying, Ryan?
Well, but like, you know, Shannon, people forget he's like a top 5 tight end of all time. He's a 3-time Super Bowl champion. He's from a famous football family, and it gives him a lot of cachet in making sports arguments in a way that the rest of us kind of never quite could reach. But you know, he's been an enormous star, and he's in quite an advantageous position to cash in from it. And so is Colin, by virtue of the fact that Shannon is under this volume umbrella. But so Stephen A is, you're right, he's trying to build his own YouTube channel, and he has hired this guy, Bailey Carlin, who used to work at Barstool, who's a enemy of Dave Portnoy at this point, to run his socials for him. And so when you see like these tweets, like where Stephen A is like eulogizing the Dragon Ball Z founder or whatever, and you're like, where did that come from? That's the answer. And so he's trying to catch up in YouTube, and he's built his own production company that is selling stuff to ESPN. And so he is now coming up on his deal with ESPN in about a year, and he's trying to piece together like, okay, I'm going to be a talent on First Take and a talent on NBA Countdown. And then they got to figure out different like places in the Disney and ESPN budget to make extra money available to him, so he doesn't feel like he's earning less than Pat McAfee, Joe Buck, and Troy Aikman. Because when Stephen A signed his last deal, it was to be the highest paid talent at ESPN. Those 3 people I just named have leapfrogged him, and now he's trying to get to that $20 million a year range and past them. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can find enough different like kind of buckets in the Disney universe to make him feel like he is earning more than them.
Well, it's tough because he's the king of a diminishing art. That cable, right? The cord is getting cut. He is the king of sports talk in the daytime, and even if they've juiced the ratings, as we have discussed,
he's not, by the way.
Years.
Like they keep saying he is, and he's not. Like more people watch PTI than First Take. I know PTI is a half hour and First Take is 2 hours long, but like almost twice as many people watch PTI as First Take every day.
Yeah, PTI is in an odd spot. It's almost like The Simpsons right now, where most of us who watched it in its early days go, "Oh, that's still going," and yeah, it's still going. And I suppose the viewership, listenership is robust enough. But it is in this funny space of seeming of a generation, and that generation has moved on for the most part. But it still retains an audience relative to the other options.
Yeah, and maybe you could say, okay, well, there's more people watching TV at 5:30 Eastern time than 11 a.m. Eastern or 10 a.m. or whenever First Take starts. That's probably true. So maybe like First Take gets like a bigger percentage of people who are watching TV. But if you're talking about gross audience, more people watch PTI. So yeah, the thing is though, Stephen A, like when they clip him onto their YouTube channel, it does pretty good distribution on ESPN relative to a lot of their other stuff. And so he does have value there. And I think, though, there's like a couple other things working in his factor. They don't want him as like a ESPN critic at large in the marketplace in the way, like Dan Levitard has kind of become.
Interesting.
So there is also maybe the idea like, hey, this guy deserves to be our highest paid talent. Like Buck and Aikman are incredible, and we've gone over their value in the past, which is the fact that they help, in intangible sense, ESPN gets better games divvied to it from the NFL based on the fact that the league feels it's in good hands with these broadcasters. But at the same time, they're working, 18 dates a year. And
they're not gonna piss from outside the tent if they get fired and become a critic of ESPN either. Though I would love to see it, because that's my favorite aspect of a Troy Aikman game, is how negative he is in the moment. But it's not going to happen, to what you're saying. So his ability to deliver scathing argument, do what he did against Jason Whitlock, that's something that ESPN doesn't want, and that is a bit of leverage, Ryan, that it did not occur to me till you just mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how much it factors in, and at the end of the day, like, they're not going to pay him $75 million a year, but I think that there's a good chance they come to an agreement as things stand now, if I had to guess. But like the fight with McAfee, it is interesting because they're so different. McAfee came from the outside. ESPN like was so desperate to get into this like digital tent with him and have the cachet where he interviews these big star players. Like, Rodgers was, people pan these appearances, but when he went on there, he's like, yeah, people don't want to go on First Take and Get Up. They want to go on your show. And that's true. Like, you don't see Travis Kelce going on Get Up and First Take, but you do see him going on McAfee's show. And you can go kind of on and on down the line with that. But it's like, it is interesting because McAfee's not ever going to kind of like fall in line for them. And this is a company that for our whole lives has been nobody's bigger than the four letters. And McAfee's like, well, if you say I'm not bigger than the four letters, then I'll just go and get money from DraftKings. Like, I don't really, you need me more than I need you at this moment. And so, he's not going to kind of like sit diplomatically while he feels he's being undermined. And I think that there's a sense of Stephen A who feels kind of jealous of that. Because how many times do you think in his history he's wanted to lash out at these bosses? Remember, they got rid of him like 15 years ago, and he had to come back through the side door. Like the people running First Take, like Jamie Horowitz at the time and Skip Bayless, had to go and beg the ESPN bosses to allow him back on TV. And they said no for a while until they finally relented. And so just imagine how many times he's wanted to go after these people and he hasn't because of a sense of, duty as an employee. But I don't think that's what caused their fight. I think it was something that happened in the micro and escalated from there.
It was literally the guy was acting like a motherfucker. That's literally what caused the fight. That's what inspired it in a micro sense. There are no broader implications. I think it's funny when you report these things, how people immediately assume it comes from Norby Williamson. I know you don't want to get into who your actual sources are, but that's something that I've encountered when
I
I've done
can
reporting.
say with beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was not the source for that story. If he was leaking stuff about McAfee before, which I don't think he was, or maybe he was, I don't know. But I can say for sure that he wouldn't be now, and that I've only spoken to him one time, and it was in his office in, I don't know, like 2018, 2019. And so that's the only time I've ever directly communicated with him.